Good morning. So rather than talk to you theoretically about discipleship, I felt it was right just to talk from my own life and be probably quite open about my own journey and the ups and downs of following Jesus in my own life. Over the last few years, the last year I'd probably say, I've got into the habit of trying to ask people, what was the moment in your journey where your journey kind of accelerated, took a step forward, a leap up? And the answers have been absolutely fascinating. And there's so many. There's such a rich wealth of ways that God accelerates our journeys. But I have found that there have been sort of 5 areas that really resonate with my own life, 5 different ways. And I thought I'd just share those with you very openly, with the hope that some of them might resonate with you as well. So, let's see if this works. So, 5 areas. So I'm going to start with this first one. I grew as a disciple when my intimacy with God deepened. Romans 8, we read, Paul writes, "The Spirit you received does not make you slaves, so that you live in fear again. Rather, the Spirit you received brought about your adoption to sonship, and by him we cry, Abba, Father." This move, I think I've wrestled with throughout my discipleship journey, of going from knowledge of God to deep knowing. For me, the parallel has always been my relationship with Catherine. When before I knew a lot about Catherine, but now after 25 years, and it is my 25th anniversary is coming up this month, at that point there is now a deep knowing, is the way I would characterize. And that feels like the journey I am on and I aspire to be on in my relationship with God. Jesus did not come amongst us to simply reveal knowledge of God to us. Jesus lived and died and rose in order that we might enter into an intimate, transformational, everlasting relationship with God. God is always Emmanuel. He is always with us, alongside us. So Matthew, I tell myself, pursue the same passion for prayer and intimacy with God as you pursue with your relationship with your mobile phone. I mean, it's a kind of a helpful reminder. It's like a visual cue. 15 years ago, I was working in the Department of Education, and I was not enjoying the role. I returned late one evening in a taxi with the Director General, who was my boss. We lived 5 minutes from each other in Balham, and all the way I was wrestling with whether I should tell him about how I was feeling and that I really wasn't enjoying myself, and that actually I was beginning even to think, maybe I should move on. But I bottled out of it. The taxi driver, who had been totally silent up to that moment, he suddenly perked up. So after my colleague had got out, and literally we had these sort of 3 or 4 minutes from his house to my house, and he suddenly woke up. He hadn't said a thing. And in the space of these 3 or 4 minutes, he just peppered me with 3 questions. His first question was, "So, what do you do?" I thought, okay, well, I kind of work in the Department for Education, in strategy, blah, blah, blah. And he said, "Are you enjoying it?" And I said, "Well, no, not really, actually." And then he said, "Why are you still there?" And I didn't really have an answer to that. But fortunately, we'd arrived at my house at that point. I got out, and you know how you get out the car and you open the door and you look him in the eye. I paid him. He looked me in the eye, and I'm tingling all over as I say this. He looked me in the eye and said, "God bless you, my son," and drove off. Now, I still think, that was just it's a coincidence. But actually, I choose to believe that was God somehow speaking directly, extraordinarily into my life. And especially, the thing I always remember was him looking at me and saying, "God bless you, my son." And for me, I don't know whether you've ever had those moments. I've probably got 3 or 4 where that God came so close to me, and I remember them. And we're just talking about remembering these stories and recounting. I recount those stories. Almost one of the reasons I'm telling you about it this morning, because it's therapy for me. Because it reminds me of that lived experience, the intimacy with God. One of the huge blessings of working for Tear Fund, and now connection with Open Doors and Bible Societies and other global mission groups, is that I get to meet people out there, the poor, the marginalized, the persecuted, and hear their stories. And one of the overwhelmingly inspiring things about all of these stories is that they so often talk about an intimate moment when something changed in their life. And usually it's linked to a passage or a verse that was suddenly unpacked for them in a totally new way. One of the most frequent ones is when they hear that they are truly made in the image of God. Another one is that Romans passage I just mentioned. Another one is finding and learning that Christ is in me, the hope of glory. Intimacy also grows. I think this is one of the things we struggle with in the West. Is intimacy grows when I'm suffering, when there's cost and sacrifice. I memorize Psalm 23 again as something to keep me remembering of God's intimacy. When I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. When my twin daughters, Laura and Natalie, were born, 3 months premature with special needs, they both have identical twins with Down syndrome, a close friend sent me these words of truth and hope from a wonderful poem you might have heard called The Gate of the Year. It was a poem that's spoken by King George VI at the outset of World War II. It goes like this: "And I said to the man who spoke at the gate of the year, 'Give me a light that I may tread safely into the unknown.' And he replied, 'Go out into the darkness and put your hand into the hand of God. That shall be to you better than light and safer than a known way.' So I went forth, and finding the hand of God, trod gladly into the night. And he led me towards the hills and breaking of day in the lone east." That notion of putting my hand into the hand of God, and what I've discovered over the years of that encounter of suffering, and as I've lived through parenting and loving Laura and Natalie, they are to me in many ways Jesus Christ. They are to me Christ in many ways. They've shown me so many things about myself. I've learnt so much. I would not be standing here to you today had I not been parents, had they not been born to me. In so many ways, God has made things new for me in the relationship with these two girls. The Haiti earthquake, I remember going out to the Haiti earthquake, and at the time there was a conversation I had. I think it was possibly a news interview or something, I can't quite remember. But there were people saying, where was God here? Where was God in that earthquake? That was kind of a Western perspective. And I went out, and what I discovered, traveling and meeting people of faith, and indeed people who were rediscovering their faith out there in the midst of the earthquake, they weren't asking that at all. They were saying, God is with us. And it's so telling that when I find people in poverty, in brokenness, in the midst of earthquakes, in suffering, so often that's the story I hear. They don't say, where is God? They say, God is alongside me in the suffering. Intimacy with God. I think this is the foundation. Intimacy with God. We have to start here, I think, in our discipleship journeys. Yet so many people, friends of mine, I think they have a cognitive knowledge of God, but they've so rarely encountered or even believe that that level of intimacy is possible. So a measure. So there was a question yesterday. How do we measure the quality of growth? Well, this is the question I keep asking myself, and I encourage friends to ask me. To what degree can I say my relationship with Jesus is growing more intimate, more real, and personal day by day? Second area, I grew as a disciple when I embraced a far bigger whole of life vision as the context for my following Jesus. Revelation 21, Jesus seated on the throne said, I am making everything new, everything. I spoke about this yesterday, the bigger vision, the whole of life vision. And this had a huge impact on me at Tear Fund. God is making everything new, everything. He's restoring relationships with every one of us, with himself, with ourselves, with our neighbor, with the whole of creation. And he's invited me to be part of that. So when I joined TIFA, I was really challenged by these words from God's frozen people. That's another one of those reports I mentioned yesterday that I think was written in the 50s or the 60s. And the word said this: the question to which men and women want an answer is what difference being a Christian makes to the things that they do and the decisions that they make during the working day and the working week. Why should a scientist or an engineer or an administrator attach any great importance to religion unless it says to him, in the work you are doing day by day, you are a partner of God in his work of creation and the realization of his purpose for the family of the sons of men? So when I joined Tear Fund, I was kind of saying, this is sort of 15 years ago, I went in with a particular passion. I didn't want to work with just another relief and development organization. I went in saying, is Tear Fund just Oxfam with a few Bible verses around the edge? With a bit of window dressing to attract a Christian audience? Or is it something completely different? Do we have a completely different understanding of how we tackle poverty and injustice in the world? Well, the greatest challenges with sustainable development, having been in the midst of it for 10 years, is that so much of tackling poverty comes down to how do you change mindsets and behaviors of people living in poverty. And when you bury deeper, it really is all about changing a human heart. That's the key to sustainable development. If you change a human heart, you change mindsets, you change behaviors. The other great challenge is what is often called the last mile of delivery. The HIV drugs, they're available in the hospital 50 miles away, but the question is, how do you journey with a person living with HIV and AIDS? How do you love them enough to journey with them, to help them realize they face into the reality, to care for them, to provide them resources, to get them to the antiretrovirals, to provide all of the home-based care they will need and the loving community they need? What we need is a Christ-centered, loving, accessible, indigenous community around the poor and in the midst of the poor. That's the way we will sustain poverty. That's the way we'll get people out of poverty in transformational ways. Well, what about the local church? And so this led us on a journey of saying, well, if that's our understanding of human dignity, if the dynamic of relationships and restoration of relationships is the pattern of God's mission in the world, then we need to see that in the way we're tackling poverty and injustice in the world. And it led us to wrestle with the reality of working alongside local churches in the world. It led us to cast a vision for the 10-year vision, which was all about seeing 100,000 local churches around the world bring physical and spiritual transformation to people in poverty. And it completely transformed the way we work. But I needed that whole of life vision and the belief that a biblical worldview will completely reimagine the way we tackle poverty if only we have the time and energy to think it through. The area that I'm passionate about now is redeeming organizations, wherever they are. Organizations are fundamentally a bunch of people working together. And there's more and more, people are more and more aware that actually to get organized, make organizations fruitful, there's kind of two things you need to figure out how to do. Number one is you need to help, how do you help people come alive in the organization so that they're bringing everything of their passion and gifting and in pursuit of the organizational vision? How do you do that? And the second one is how do you get people to relate fabulously together? Does our Bible, does Scripture have anything to say about human flourishing on the one hand or relationships on the other? It's got masses to say. I like to challenge people when they think about, especially leaders of organizations, the predominant context for a huge proportion of us about where we are made as disciples is in organizations. So if you're a Christian leading an organization, do you know whether your organization is either accelerating people towards Jesus or pushing them away? Because you should know which it is. Because this is where people are being discipled, whether you like it or not. They are. They're either growing towards or moving away. And we've got so much wisdom to apply in redeeming our workplaces that's grounded in Scripture, if only we have a whole-of-life vision. Help, I'm running way over. I spoke about this yesterday, identity. I'm not going to touch on that again. But for me, the fact I am a chosen people, a royal priesthood, that blew my mind when I really first engaged with it. And it completely helped me reimagine my relationship with Richard, my vicar, for both of us. Embracing so I've talked about a bigger mission, a bigger understanding of my identity, a bigger whole-of-life understanding of church. Dave Bull, who is the rector in charge at the Anglican Church in Marlow, he said this to me, Matthew, our church is perhaps the most photographed building in the area, set on the banks of the Thames, next to Marlow's beautiful suspension bridge. There it is. Everyone has their favourite picture of it, but my favourite picture of our church comes from our church database. It shows red dot on the right, red dots for every household, and gives an inspiring perspective of the true church, living among and loving all the people of our parish and beyond. LICC, London Institute of Contemporary Christianity, have this very powerful image where they talk about the church gathered on Sunday, 9 to 12 a.m., maybe 6 to 9 p.m. But then they talk about the church scattered, Monday to Saturday. Both are images of church, gathered and sent. For me, that was a total reframing. So this idea of a bigger vision had a huge impact on my discipleship journey. So what's my measure here? Well, I ask myself now and then, to what degree do I agree with this statement? My faith in God is powerfully relevant to my everyday life, Monday to Saturday, as evidenced in the stories I recount where God is working with and through me in the life of the world. Do you remember that statistic yesterday I shared, where 50% of people said, I don't have any story to share about God working through me in the world? Discerning a specific vocation and calling. I grew as a disciple of Christ when I found a specific vocation that I sensed God was calling me into. I've struggled with two questions over the years. Who is called? I think for years, I thought the only people who are called are those who are called to ordained vocation and foreign missionaries. That's Hudson Taylor. And that was it. And I wrestled with the question, well, if I am called, what am I called into? And for much of my life, I think what was told to me, the story told to me, Matthew, here's your Christian vocation. Work wherever you like, doesn't matter. Be nice. Convert people when you can. Give 10% of your money to the church. Or maybe some charities as well. And that was it. That was kind of the vision for a life. It's not very inspiring. So through programs and courses and so on, I've been led to read the Bible again. Where in the Bible does it talk about God calling people specifically? And actually, right the way through the Bible, God is calling people left, right, and center. Not just in very broad terms to love, but to do specific things at specific moments and specific times, using specific gifts and specific talents. I haven't got time to go through all of those. There's a series of questions that have really challenged me over the years. And I've been sort of gathering these questions whenever I find them because they really help, because I'm still on that journey. I'm still on wrestling with I'm always wrestling with vocation. Especially having left Tear Fund, I think, well, what now? Where next, Lord? But I expect an answer now. I think that's the difference. And I expect it to be specific. Some great questions here have helped me. What is your holy discontent? What's the thing that God has put on your heart that makes you angry and frustrated or puts a sense of longing on your heart? What is your passion, and how does this intersect with service of other people? More of that in a moment. If God was in charge of your workplace, how would things be different? I spoke on that earlier. Where do you see God at work in your workplaces and in your front lines? How is God working to restore and redeem your workplaces? I did a course at St. Mark's Battersea Rise called the Adventure of Living course. And it's the only course I've ever found like this, which is all about finding and wrestling and searching your specific calling. And it was very powerful for me, particularly this idea that I should hunt and scent and search for calling where my passion intersects, my gifts and abilities intersects with opportunities to bless and serve others. And I should mine and root around there. And I did that after I did this course. And I did that with others. It wasn't on my own. That was a really important part of the process. And out of that, I came with a very strong belief that I should be working in international development in a Christian organization, which I really was a surprise to me, because I thought working with Christian organizations then was a bit of a cop-out, and in some kind of leadership role. And within 6 months, I'd found my way into Tear Fund. I kind of often reflect how much effort the Church of England puts into discerning vocations for ordained people. And it's absolutely right, that that is exactly what we should do. But just imagine if we put the same effort into helping lay people discern their vocations. I think that if every member of the Church of England woke up tomorrow having been through a similar process, I think this country would be transformed. Because you wake up with energy and vision. I know what the Lord is calling me to do. I have a clearer sense. It may never be absolutely clear, but at least I've wrestled with it with others. I'm going to leave this framework, but there are other set of questions again coming out of London Institute of Contemporary Christianity, which they call the 6M framework. And again, it's 6 great questions to help you probe that sense of what might my vocation and sense of calling be. The 4th area, I grew as a disciple when I discovered that practicing a rule of life actually works. It actually does change you. It's like one of these things you have to keep doing. It's like a muscle you have to exercise. And so often I think I would sort of pick up a discipline, exercise for a day, and then say that was a bit difficult and leave it behind. But actually, I've now got into the practice of doing things consistently over time and discovering that it actually works. 1 Corinthians 9:25-27, Paul writes, everyone who competes in the games goes into strict training. They do it to get a crown that will not last, but we do it to get a crown that will last forever. Jordan Peterson might think he was the first person to come up with a rule of life. But of course he wasn't. This runs through Christian tradition, going back hundreds and hundreds of years. The Jesuits. I was introduced to all of this about 15 years ago. The Jesuits, the rule of St. Benedict, the rule of St. Francis. I'm not an expert in psychology, yet those who are tell me that there is an ever-growing body of evidence and experience highlighting the links between the body and the mind, regarding neuroplasticity, the ability to the brain to sort of repattern, renew, relearn. The whole field of growth of positive psychology. the scientific study of what makes worth living and the patterns that lead to that. And all I think point to the same importance of developing practices and habits. And of course, the Gospels were full of it, weren't they? I mean, it feels like the whole of Jesus' life was just saying, here are a whole bunch, here's a smorgasbord of habits for you to choose and apply and live. And that's what he did with the disciples. They applied and lived in community. Paul highlights this in Romans 12, one of the passages that's really spoken to me over the years. Do not be conformed to the patterns of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. What are the new patterns, the new habits? So for me, there's so many that I've been trying to live and abide by. But let me just pick, so keeping a journal. Intentional time in the morning. I'm not very good at it, but I do try every day, before anything. Intentional time in prayer. Eating meals with the family. Contemplative or silent prayer. I never even heard of this 5 or 6 years ago. That's had a profound impact on me. Practicing slowing down and being fully present. I've got 3 that I'm really focusing on at the moment. Practicing slowing down and being fully present. Not in the future. I'm a planner. My mind is always off in the future. And I'm a bit of I'm not a very confident person, so I'm often thinking about the past. But God's in here. God's in the moment. God's here now. He's in the present. He's not in the future. He's here. So how am I going to live in the present moment? And as I do so, I'm becoming a more still person. I'm more aware of God around me and in those I'm with. I'm practicing the art of gratitude. Yeah, I loved what you said about practicing, being thankful for mercies, counting my blessings. And I'm trying to just get into the practice, the practice of saying thank you to people, of seeing God's blessing around me. And that's one of the things I've been saying. My cup is not half empty. It's actually not half full. It's overflowing in Psalm 23. Becoming more grateful, content, I think, as a result. And I'm choosing to think the best of others. Not judging, listening. Stepping into their shoes first. Choosing to think the best of others. It's a choice that I practice. And as a result, I think I'm becoming a little bit more loving and appreciative of those around me. So what measure am I using here to count my progress? I'm intentional about strengthening those spiritual disciplines that will most help me grow in Christ-likeness. I ask myself that question. Finally, becoming a learning community of disciples. I'm not going to say much on this. Actually, we've touched on it. I think it was very powerfully shared just now about the importance of community, that we do not travel alone as disciples. But I just want to highlight one thing, one very specific thing. I think one of the most important things as I reflect on my journey, and actually as I ask some of the people I know closest, and especially when I ask pastors, when I say what was the group, what was the place where has most helped you, accelerated your discipleship journey, they invariably speak of a group of 2 or 3 or 4 people that they met at college or that they've just been journeying with since for many years. It's the same with me. When I started at Tear Fund 14, 15 years ago, this was what was recommended to me. So I found 2 other people. 2 other people. We call ourselves the Morgin Pilgrims, just because we wanted a name and give a name to what we were doing. We're 3 people. We've been meeting for 14 years now. We meet 4 times a year. Every time it's 24 hours, and every time we meet, we have a rhythm. There's a rhythm of prayer through the day. We use offices, so 4 times a day. We start about midday. We go for a walk. We talk about what's been going on. We go out for a meal in the evening. And then the whole of the following morning, we go through a disciplined structure of asking ourselves about what's happening in our faith walk, what's happening in our community life, and what's happening at home, and what's happening in work. And then we pray for one another. It started with us sharing our stories and total openness to one another, the ups and downs. We have a WhatsApp group where we just encourage us. It's just a way of just throwing things, asking questions, requesting prayer, challenging one another on the journey. Now that group has been massively instrumental in my own growth. Often a lot of the journeys, the insights that I've had in the last came from this group. And I think somehow, how do we find a rhythm of having that level of openness and accountability and trust in our lives? So here, the measure I keep asking myself, and I'm asking people to ask myself, and I ask myself, is to what degree do I agree with this statement? I am being mentored and encouraged by others in relationships characterized by transparency, trust, and love. So in closing, it's just my story. It's just some of the things from my journey. But imagine for a moment if every disciple in our local church could say that they are on a journey where each of the following statements are becoming, not true, but becoming slowly true. My relationship with Jesus is growing more intimate, real, and personal day by day. My faith in God is powerfully relevant in my everyday life, Monday to Saturday as well as Sunday, as evidenced in the stories I recount where God is working with and through me in the life of the world. I know God's purposes for me and the specific missional front lines that I believe I am called to serve in for this time and period. I seek to follow a rule of life, practicing and strengthening those spiritual disciplines that will most help me grow in Christ-likeness. And finally, I'm being mentored and encouraged by others in relationships characterized by transparency, trust, and love. Thank you.